Sandeep Chachra, if I can come into with you. You heard Ms. Ritu speak right now, and you heard it very clearly. She's saying the mandate for the private sector may be that, but you can't put the entire blame of the lack of jobs in the market on the private sector. When you heard of the economic survey today, when you heard what was, when you read it, did you get a sense of what Mr. Tuparna is saying? Does it look like the entire blame is being shifted to the private sector? Because that's what some have echoed.
So thank you, Snehaji, for having me here, and good evening to all. I think there are a couple of things. Firstly, on the private sector, the message is clear, and I think it's important because what we have seen for the last 3 decades, it's not just now, is the share of labor in the capital formation has continuously gone down. And it's good that the economic survey points to it and therefore points to the responsibility. In a welfare state, you can't have a private sector that's totally unhinged. And it is the responsibility of the state to encourage, message, and also regulate. So I welcome this message. Because if you look at data you presented a lot, I'm not going to repeat it, there's much more data available. But quite clearly, the job creation, even the wages in the private sector have not kept pace with it. ILO notes, International Labour Organization notes in general, that in the Indian context, wage growth has been very, very low, particularly for low and middle income groups, and amongst the lowest in Asia. But going beyond, there's another trend. So the one is the question of employment and creating that employment and the role of private sector. It's important to message and regulate that. But second is another notable trend, and that is the trend of growing contractualization in the private sector. So if you look at data, I have some data here from the annual survey of industries. If you look at recent data and compare it with the annual survey of industries in 2002-03 to now, you will find that the rate of growth of contractual workers, which are under lesser employment conditions, insecurity of wages, not permanent, social security not given, it's grown rapidly. It currently stands in 2021-22 at 40%. And this is more pronounced in factories operating in rural India, in the countryside, in the agrarian India. And that has grown. If you sort of see, it was used to be 23% in
because it's easy, hire and fire. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. So yes, it's hire and fire, impermanent contracts, flexible working conditions, a lot of things that you've already pointed to, but lower employment. But then, having said this, so there's a responsibility of industry, not just to create jobs, but also quality of jobs and also respecting the labor rights. So I think that's one message this can multiply into. But there's a second issue, which is very, very important. The creation of job, as my earlier panelist was speaking, is not just the responsibility of private sector primarily, because a large majority of the working people in India are in the informal sector. And not just that, and there again, your data was pointing to a more general picture, some progression, some regressions, and the inability to create jobs, to youthful India, where the aspirations are much higher, to data which points to the fact that there's an issue there. There's a huge crisis there. I take instance of the MGNREGA data. The MGNREGA data of 2019, 2020, 2020 tells us that 265 point some crore jobs were created. But in 2023-24, 40 more crores of jobs were given, percent days of employment, which stands to 305 crores roughly. So you know that the demand is there. We know the demand is there incidentally through when you have job applications for a few thousand, you see lakhs and lakhs of people, endless lakhs of people apply to those jobs. Most recently, the instance was in Bombay. So the need for jobs is huge. And therefore,
absolutely. And if you can have those visuals as well.
Yeah, and the government therefore has to create pathways for creation of jobs in rural India and creation of jobs in urban India. I mean, the right to work is a dream. So we must work towards this. Okay. So MGNREGA expansion, number of days expansion, these are pathways, but there are other pathways available. And incidentally, Snehaji, before I end, I must also say that industry bodies, I was listening into what CII's view is, are actually wanting this. They are wanting state investment into rural infrastructure. They're wanting job creation, direct job creation instruments. They're wanting, sort of creation of agricultural supply chains and better supply chains. So essentially putting money in the hands of people, not just through welfare schemes. So yes, the expectation for tomorrow is budget day, and the expectation of augmentation of PM Kisan is very much there. So amount of, but
we'll come to that in a bit. Sandeep Chachra, you're raising your hand for quite a long time. Thank you for your patience. Please go ahead. You wanted to make a point.
Couple of quick ones. Firstly, on the trivia that you mentioned is something that needs to be repaired. It's not just a trivia. The definitions of employment are at variance, total variance with common sense understanding of what employment means and real understanding to people of what employment is. Secondly, at this point, when
Thank you
buoyed
for
by
stating that.
RBI
I'm glad
dividends
someone
and
has
other
said that.
yeah, but buoyed by RBI dividends, a strong growth trajectory, it's a responsibility for the new government, but also a historic compulsion, which it can't just, it's not just only about private sector. It has to have direct measures to address the employment problem and create employment as a state directly. Apart from, of course, together with private sector, the messaging which has been done today. So I don't think the messaging is only limited to private sector. This is also a messaging back to the budget, where social expectations are huge, Snehaji, of instruments to revive what is
Hmm.
called rural economy and urban economy in the hands of people. Essentially, the cooperative movement needs to be revitalized. The
Right.
question of women's skills and women's jobs needs to be given a central attention. Since you were asking budget expectations related to these are the
Hmm.
kind of expectations we need to see. We need to see rural and urban futures in the hands of people, in the hands of people who are unemployed, partly employed. What is a new social class today of totally unemployed kind of people as well. It's a new social class. So I think there are lots of things which your conversation opens up. I know there's not time enough, but I think these are things that are welcome, and I'm happy and glad
Right.
that you have
Okay.
initiated this discussion. Thank you, Snehaji.